Well, I'm Glenys Jones and I work with the Autism Centre at the University of Birmingham, and I'm one of the co-editors of the Good Autism Practice Journal. And in fact, I was one of the founders in 2000 when we felt we needed a vehicle to promote and disseminate all the good practice that was happening, particularly in the UK. Because at the time there was a lot of work coming out of America and Australia and other places which seemed to be taking precedence. And we needed a platform really for practitioners, professionals, parents and people with autism themselves to actually record what they were doing. And in fact this conference is born out of the journal, because we had the journal for a number of years and then we decided, well, let's invite some of the authors along to actually present their work in conference format. And here we are today at a conference that focusing particularly on wellbeing and happiness. And I like to think that we've always promoted a positive take on autism and what we can do to make people's lives better, whether they're parents or professionals or the people themselves, rather than focusing on deficit and the difficulties that the condition often implies.
Okay.
Well, I think recently there's been a lot more literature and discussion around focusing on the strengths and interests of children and adults with autism and Asperger's syndrome. So we're now moving into a position where we are looking much more at that rather than focusing on deficits and disorder. And I think if we go into the workplace or indeed join our family where the child has autism with the view that we're going to have an enjoyable experience and we're going to have fun because we're focusing on what that person enjoys, then immediately everybody's going to feel more positive. I think when we only focus on the areas of difficulty in autism, which we know commonly affect a person's ability to communicate or to feel comfortable with other people or to perhaps do things that are sensorily challenging, then we're in a zone where we're thinking about problems and difficulties for most of the time. And because autism potentially can affect many aspects of a person's life, we could spend the whole day or even the whole 24 hours focusing on areas of difficulty. If we turn it around and ask what does that person enjoy doing, when are they relaxed, when are they engaged, when they're happy, then we're immediately feeling differently. And there are one or two ideas coming out of places like Studio 3 and Peter Vermeulen's work, where staff now are asked to record the number of times that a person has seemed happy or has made the staff smile, or where praise has been given as opposed to looking at how often they're sanctioned or challenging. Well, I think as in many fields we're creatures of habit, and why it's taken so long to get into the realm of emotional well-being and happiness is that people weren't talking about emotional well-being and happiness and enjoyment when we referred to autism and Asperger's syndrome. Because it came from a medical background, we're often thinking about how do we solve the problems that we're presented with, instead of thinking more positively about how we can enhance the person's quality of life and well-being at the current time. So, yeah, I think that's going a bit pear-shaped as well. Let me start, because I didn't introduce the question, so I'll try and introduce the question. I did, sort of, but...
You did? Oh,
yeah, okay. So, yeah. In terms of what I think about why it's taking so long for us to start talking more positively about emotional well-being and happiness in autism, is that we tend to be creatures of habit, and we tend to go with what other people are saying about a condition, whatever it is, or about a field of work generally. And we often don't advance the field very quickly. We tend to copy other people a lot. And that's not very creative. And it doesn't often lead to positive practice. And it is amazing, really, that autism has been around since the 1940s, and yet it's taken 60 years to start thinking about how do we help a child and an adult with autism or Asperger's syndrome feel good about themselves and feel positive, and how do we maintain their well-being. Because it's a known fact that when we feel emotionally happy and engaged, that our learning is so much better and that our quality of life, our physical and mental well-being is so much better. So it's really only in the last few years when people like Peter Vermeulen and Andy MacDonald have been talking a lot more about, let's change the focus from trying to modify the individual in some way or get them more skilled in a certain area. Let's now focus on how they're actually feeling. Are they happy in this school or in this workplace or even within the family? When do we know when they're well engaged and when they're happy and when they're feeling positive about themselves? And can we do more of that? Thinking now about how parents might enhance their own son or daughter's emotional well-being and happiness, I think for a long time professionals have been guilty of suggesting to parents that they need to follow a particular intervention, or they need to find a particular type of school, or they need to do whatever else they might do to help their son or daughter. And we've really missed the plot. What we need to do first of all is to help parents think about when their child is happiest, what they enjoy doing, what they're skilled at doing. So suggesting that they observe the child in all the everyday family activities that they do with their parents, with their brothers and sisters, maybe with their grandparents, and think, when do I think my son or daughter is at his most relaxed and where he's feeling positive about himself? And I think the message really is to say do more of that, rather than chasing some sorts of interventions that turn the whole family lifestyle and dynamic on its head and may not work to their best interest at all. Or they get disappointed because they can't access or afford the particular intervention or the type of schooling that they want. So it's giving the parents the message is in your own hands, because you know your child best. You know how your family wants to live, whether you're a city family or a rural family, whether you like camping, whether you like going outdoor pursuits, whatever your interests are as a family have got to match as well what your son or daughter wants to do. So live life as naturally as possible and try to do more of the things that your son or daughter enjoys. In terms of the strategies that are used in schools or adult services for children and adults with autism, I think for me the ones that have got most mileage are those where the young people and children are having fun and are enjoying what they're doing. And again, I often say to staff, go through the child's timetable and give it a rating out of 10 in terms of how engaged they are and how happy they are when they're doing it. And if they're only getting 2 out of 10 for some of those, you have to consider, do they need to do that? And do they need to do it now? And could we do more of where you've rated them 8 out of 10? If we need to do the other sessions, then we have to think, what are the elements in the 8s out of 10 that lead to that engagement and that enjoyment that we can build into those other sessions that we think it's in their interest to do, but which they, for some reason they're not as easily engaged into. I have really liked the work of Phoebe Caldwell, who says to all practitioners, when you first meet a new person with autism, then you are a beginner again. So I think observation is key, and not moving in too quickly with your own agenda, but trying to think, how does that young person, child or adult, fit into this setting? What makes them anxious, what makes them relaxed, and what sort of personal approach is most effective. And I think we've switched a lot from focusing on which intervention, which sort of kit, be it teach, option, LOVAS, PECS, CERTs, to thinking about the adults in the interaction, be they parents or professionals, or indeed other young people with autism. What is it about their approach to that young person that leads to good engagement, and what actually leads them to disengage or not engage at all in the first place? So Phoebe Caldwell often says the way we dress, how close we get to a young person, where we stand in relation to them, when we first speak, what do we say? So we know that using minimal language, being calm and quiet around the person, and getting to know all those things about that individual is crucial. And finally on that, I would say, as a shorthand, it's to read the person, the child or the adult with autism, and don't assume that from your knowledge of autism, from the literature or from the websites, you now know what to do. You don't know what to do until you know that young person. In terms of books and websites on the area of wellbeing and happiness in autism, I think always the first set of literature you should go to is to read the accounts of adults and young people themselves with autism and Asperger's syndrome. They often tell us about the misery and the depression and the difficulties they have, but many of them then tell us about how their lives have been turned around totally once they have understood themselves and their autism, and once other people understand them, and once they have developed a niche for themselves, whether it be in a relationship, in a home that they now feel comfortable living in, on their own or with others, or whether it's in employment. So they have given us such insight into what makes them feel better about themselves and on a daily basis, and the sorts of things that make them feel very bad. So some of the stories are quite shocking, but they are very, very convincing, and I think they make professionals and parents and others stand up and pay attention, and they're often full of excellent ideas. Beyond that, other professionals who've spent their lives in autism, like Peter Vermeulen, now write very powerfully about how we can turn our attention away from depression and stress and anxiety to what promotes a good lifestyle and a good quality of life. He's written 2 books that are important. One is Autism as Context Blindness, which explains to us why it is that often they say and do things that others think are rude or inappropriate. And the other more recent one is his book on autism and happiness. He's also written a chapter on promoting wellbeing in this new book published by Bild, which is linked to the Good Autism Practice Journal. And indeed, there are other chapters too, some of which are from adults with autism and others who've been working for years in the field of trying to understand the behaviour of people with autism and trying to help parents and staff understand that behaviour and therefore to act appropriately and effectively with that group.